My name is Jerry Kroth. I'm a professor at Santa Clara University. I wrote a book many years ago and just updated it. It's called Ground Zero: Jerusalem, Holy War, and Collective Insanity. This talk is about the most explosive piece of real estate on planet Earth, and it's 2022. So let's get started with a 35-acre site in the center of Jerusalem called the Temple Mount in the west. It's got the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, sacred to Islam. It's got the Wailing Wall. Here's a short little video description of what's going on here.
The Dome of the Rock is one of the most iconic buildings in the world, showing up in travel posters everywhere as an integral part of the Jerusalem skyline. It's one of the most sacred sites in the world for Muslims today, believed to be the site of the Prophet Muhammad's night journey and ascension, a story briefly told in the Quran and expanded in later literature, in which Muhammad miraculously travels from Mecca to Jerusalem overnight before ascending into heaven to meet the prophets and God. The building is also a source of controversy as it stands on the same spot as the first and second Jewish temples, the holiest site for Jews and a site of vital importance to their religious history. Control of the Temple Mount itself, or as it's called by Muslims, the Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, remains in a delicate political balance. The Israeli government controls access, but the Jerusalem Waqf, an Islamic administrative body largely funded by the Jordanian government, manages all of the affairs in the sanctuary itself.
Now, I want you to get a better picture of it, so take a look. There's the Dome of the Rock, there's the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and there's the Jewish Wailing Wall, okay? Now, we're going to be talking about that as the most proximate cause of World War III. Now, when you start looking at this, you first encounter what is called media bias. This is a graph of violent deaths in the first 11 years of this millennium. Look at the Congo. Almost 5 million people died in the Congo, and a few thousand people died in the Israel West Bank area. But look at how the media covers it. The primetime news stories. Congo, if you search the Vanderbilt television archives and you put in the search term Congo, that's what you get. If you put in the search term Jerusalem, that's what you get. It's at least 500 times more attention being paid to this area than that area. Now you could say, is that media bias, or is there another reason? Well, maybe it is media bias, but that also includes not just Western press, it includes Al Jazeera, it includes European press. Everybody seems to be doing it. And I think the rationale might be that World War III is not going to break out in the Congo, but it is going to break out here. And that may be another reason about why there's so much attention paid to this area. So I want to tell you a little bit about collective insanity and what that means. Individual insanity, you can have individual people who have hallucinations and delusions and megalomania or Machiavellian or lost contact with reality or have fits, okay? But collective insanity is where that particular individual's mental illness has gone viral. It has spread, and millions of people have been sucked in to this psychotic thing, and it causes mass psychosis.
Es lebe unsere Bewegung! Es lebe unser deutsches Volk! Es lebe unser deutsches Reich! Sieg heil!
Okay, now the consequences of mass psychosis, when the entire society goes off the rails, it causes a great deal of tragedy. 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. 285,000 gypsies were put to death between 1939 and 1945. 200,000 disabled people in Europe were murdered. 63 million people altogether, military, civilian, Russian, and so forth. And you could ask the question, why did World War II happen? Was it that Germans needed oil? Were they running out of food? Was it economic? Or was it psychiatric? And I think you have to admit There's something psychiatric going on between 1939 and 1945. You can't explain it all by economic determinism. Now, it happened again in Cambodia with Pol Pot, who was a delusional paranoid. So was his wife mentally ill. The people surrounding him were mentally ill. He murdered 30% of his country in a thing called autogenocide. He killed 30% of the people in Cambodia. If you wore glasses, you were exterminated. If you had a beard, it was a sign of capitalist degeneracy. If you spoke French to the killing fields, all the libraries were closed. Everybody in society was required to wear black. Everyone had to change their name to a monosyllabic name. The words mother, father, uncle, grandfather were forbidden under penalty of death. This is psychiatric. All right. So we're looking at collective insanity here. We're not attempting to attack any religion. Okay, we're looking at the very far out fringes which cause this conflict to be so acute. So I call them the four modern horsemen of the apocalypse. Okay, and here they are. Radical fundamentalism is one. Extreme messianism is another. Militant Christian evangelism, really militant, really extreme. And what is called territoriality. I want to look at all four of these things. There are four factors that press upon this 35-acre site. Everybody has an interest here, an extreme, almost psychotic interest in this area, and put it all together. And this is the ignition place for World War III. That's what this topic is, and that's what we're talking about today. So let's talk about putting some people in our virtual asylum. Okay, we're going to imagine that we're going to take these patients off the streets of the world and put them into our virtual asylum. So our fundamentalist wing begins with the idea their holy war against terrorism is the only solution, says Birmingham Islamist. So let's now enter the world of the extreme. Okay, and we have three sources of candidates for our asylum: the bin-Laden al-Qaeda candidates, the Mahdi Mania or candidates, or ISIS. So Americans misperceive who bin Laden was. They think of him as the person who did 9/11, but in reality, he was an incredible anti-Semite. This is what he said: "We have not hesitated in the killing of Jews who have conquered the sanctuary of our prophet. The sanctuary is Al-Aqsa. He was interested in that 35 acres. He wanted to liberate it from Jewish control. That's part of what 9/11 was all about. I don't think Americans understand that. We call him the head of Al-Qaeda. He didn't call himself the head of Al-Qaeda. He said he was the head of the World Islamic Front, urging jihad against Jews and crusaders." So that's what bin Laden was about, and his Al-Qaedistas belong, some of them, in our asylum. Here's the Mahdi. I pronounce it wrong. I apologize. This is the Islamic savior to some sects within Islam. The Mahdi is like a Christ figure who is just and caring and loving. And the hidden imam in Shiite Muslim eschatology, end times theory, is that he's alive and hiding until the right moment. Here is Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, talking about the Mahdi.
امام در دوران غیبت رفته یه جای مشغول زندگی خودشه، کاری به کار عالم نداره. چون اگه کاری به کار عالم نداشت وجودی باقی نمیموند، همه هستی به هم میریخت. امام مدیریت میکند جهان.
We arrived at the Jamkaran Mosque on the outskirts of Qom. Behind the Jamkaran Mosque, there is a well, and according to many Shiite Muslims, out of this well will emerge one day their version of an Islamic savior. They call him the Mahdi, or the 12th Imam. On this Tuesday, as the sun dips behind the mountains that surround Jamkaran, the faithful, many of whom voted for Ahmadinejad, arrive by the thousands from across Iran to pray for the Mahdi's return. The night begins with a visit to the sacred well, and CBN News is given a rare opportunity to film people praying there. The opening of the well is covered by a green-like metal box to prevent people from jumping in. Most of the time here is spent praying and kissing the metal box. Others scribble prayer requests to the Mahdi on pieces of paper that are then dropped into the well. This man asks the Mahdi to forgive his sins.
If you ask in the right way, your prayers will be answered.
And many, like this young boy with a flashlight, believe the Mahdi is actually hiding at the bottom of the well, reading those prayer requests.
In terms of looking at our candidates for admission now, we're going to take a look at some of their beliefs. The first is, and this is how the end times theory for this radical Shiite sect. The Dajjal appears. The Dajjal is an antichrist figure. The Dajjal will appear during a period of great tribulation. He will be followed by the Jews and will claim to be God in Jerusalem, And so he's like an antichrist figure. All right? And Ahmadinejad believes in this. So does the head of Hezbollah, who named, I think, his son Mahdi. Second part is that there is a great war against the Jews. From the inception of Hezbollah to the present, the elimination of the State of Israel has been a primary goal for Hezbollah. Hezbollah not only opposes the government and policies of the State of Israel, but also each and every Jewish civilian who lives in Israel. Okay? So that's the second phase of the end times scenario. And the third is the arrival of the Mahdi. Hezbollah, as well as the political religious leaders of Iran, believe that the destruction of Israel will cause the reappearance of the Imam. Okay, so the destruction of Israel is a prerequisite for the delivery of the Savior, who will enter on a white horse through the eastern gate of the Temple Mount, that 35-acre site. Okay? Now, let's take a look at our ISIS candidates. Now, we know that ISIS is a very violent and brutal religious sect. If you are not a believer in their variety of Islam, you're an apostate and deserving of death. And if you're a polytheist or someone who doesn't believe at all, you can, anything goes. Slavery, execution, it's all okay. It's a Wahhabi sect which originates in Saudi Arabia. Now, the head of ISIS currently is Amin Mohammed Abdul Rahman al-Mala al-Salb. He was just murdered by the United States about 2 weeks ago. According to them, there are 4 leaders of ISIS before the world comes into their palm, into their control. This is the second who has been assassinated. The eschatology, meaning the end times vision of ISIS, is that a great war occurs in a place called Dabiq, which is like Armageddon to them. And they have already conquered Dabiq. It's a village in northern Syria. After that, there's a conquering of the world by ISIS. And finally, the arrival of the Mahdi. Now, ISIL's philosophy is represented by the black standard flag you see to your right. The flag shows the seal of Muhammad within a white circle with the phrase above it, "There is no God but Allah." All right, so here are some quotes from ISIS. They can attack the Jews and their allies wherever they find them by killing them, destroying their property, and harming their interests in any way they can. All religions who agree with democracy must be destroyed because there's only one truth, God's word, not man's law, taking precedence over God's law. Okay, you got it? So who are we admitting to our asylum? Well, here are the criteria for admission. If you have a belief that Jews and Israel must be destroyed in order to liberate the Al-Aqsa Mosque and are willing to act on those beliefs, you fulfill our first criteria. And the belief that Jews in Israel must be destroyed in order for the Mahdi to appear, and you're willing to act upon those beliefs, welcome to our asylum. Okay, remember, insanity involves clinically hurting yourself or hurting others. That is certainly one of the components of it. So here we go. This is collective insanity. All right, now remember, we are not indicting any religion here. We're looking at a very small sliver of the Muslim world, which has deluded, insane al-Qaedistas, Mahdi maniacs, and fundamentalist, psychotic holy warriors seeking to liberate Jerusalem and the Al-Aqsa Mosque by any means necessary. And that is an estimate of about 1 million people, about half of 1%. Okay? Now, it was an Indian professor who said 2 million. And I said, I'm going to be conservative and cut that down by half. Okay, so half of 1% fit that mold. All right, let's go to our next set of candidates, Messianists, very right-wing Orthodox religious Jews who are not representative of Judaism, of Israel. I mean, the government of Israel has often declared them internal terrorists. So, some things about Judaism. Roughly 20% do not believe in God. Okay, I've seen a number as high as 40%, but this is a more conservative poll. 15% of Israelis consider themselves religious, and 8% consider themselves deeply religious. So we're talking about that little tiny sliver up there, and we're not indicting deeply religious Jews. We are looking within that small sliver for what Israel calls internal terrorists. All right? So here is their vision of the end times. It's a little more complicated. First, the first step in the coming of the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, is the end of exile for Jews and the creation of the state of Israel. That has been accomplished. Okay? The second step is rebuilding of the temple. The temple has to be rebuilt. It's the first temple, the second temple. 2,000 years later, they want to build the third temple. But where are they wanting to build it? On the dome, where the Dome of the Rock is. Problem. But anyway, that hasn't been accomplished yet. They're hoping that it will be accomplished soon. The third stage is the birth of a perfectly red heifer, a cow who's perfectly red. No gray hair. You see, she's inspecting all the hairs. There have been attempts to breed a perfectly red heifer, but they found a wisp of gray hair or a wisp of black hair. But once that's accomplished, some people, some secular Jews say, if there's a red heifer, he should be killed because it's a sign that World War III is coming. So what does that mean? By the way, the perfectly red heifer may have been born in 2018. So get ready. He has, once he's 3 years old, or she, whatever the heifer is, pardon my biology, has to, after 3 years, the heifer is sacrificed, and the ashes of the heifer are used to purify Jews and to purify the Temple Mount. Okay, that's the next step. Then there's great turmoil, like the Armageddon, but it's called the war between Gog and Magog, which is like a world war. Finally, the arrival of the Messiah. And he's also going to come through one of the gates of the Temple Mount and arrive. I don't know if he's arriving on a white horse, but the Savior, the Messiah, will be coming, and it'll be the Jewish Messiah. All right, all those things have to happen. So here's a little bit of where our patients come from. This is Rabbi David Batzri. Listen to this. The nation of Israel is pure, and the Arabs are a nation of donkeys. They are an evil disaster, an evil devil, and a nasty affliction. The Arabs are donkeys and beasts. Well, that hate speech is part of the sect and the sects that we're looking at here. Okay, so here are our criteria for admission into our virtual asylum, and this is only talking about a very small number of people. First, the destruction of the Dome of the Rock and or the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's got to be blown up so that the temple can be built. The third most holiest site in Islam has to be destroyed for the temple to be built. Are you following this? How provocative, how inflammatory that is? Secondly, they must believe that the cleansing of the Temple Mount from Muslim desecration, either through violence or the ashes of the red heifer. Ritual purification through violence. Those are three core concepts for our candidates for admission. This is their fantasy, the destruction of the Dome of the Rock. There it goes. Okay, once that's accomplished, then the temple can be built and prophecy can happen. Now, the estimate in my book for how many people actually believe these things, support these things, willing to sacrifice themselves for these things, my estimate was 1.2%, about 172,000 people worldwide. That's a very small number. In the Bible, it says there will be wars and rumors of wars. Well, here's a rumor spreading. By the way, there were a number of attempts already to blow up the Dome of the Rock. Here's a Palestinian commenting about all of this.
الهدف الآن من الحفريات تقويض من المسجد الأقصى المبارك. وبالفعل الآن أساسات المسجد الأقصى المبارك أزيلت، حتى الصخور حقنت بمواد كيماوية لإذابتها.
أحماض
نعم أحماض كيماوية.
نعم.
والأتربة والأعمدة والمسجد معلق بالهواء. هناك مخطط إسرائيلي. نعم. مخطط إسرائيلي لهدم المسجد الأقصى المبارك وإقامة الهيكل.
Okay, and certainly there are some people who believe that. So there's our second ward in our virtual asylum. Now we have a third ward, which is much larger, Christian, wild, radical, extreme Christian evangelism. Okay? And again, we're only talking about a small minority here. There are 2.1 billion Christians, just about as many as there are Muslims. 1 billion Catholics. They don't believe this stuff. 10% of Christians are evangelical. A smaller number are fundamentalist evangelicals and creationists, an even smaller number. And we're not indicting them either. Okay, we're still looking for an even smaller segment. Okay, here is their beliefs about the end of times. This is hard to get your mind around because it's got different interpretations, so I'm doing my best here. This comes from the book of Revelation. First, we have the 7 seals and the 7 bowls of wrath. These are like COVID pandemics and destruction and locusts and pests and climate change and all of these things happening that are threatening to destroy the world. The next phenomena is that the temple, the Jewish temple, is rebuilt. It's part of their vision, of their prophecy, even though there are no Christian monuments on the Temple Mount. Building the temple is essential for this prophecy to be true. Finally, there's the rapture. I don't know exactly when that happens. Sometimes say before or after Armageddon, but people who have accepted Jesus are taken up into heaven. All right? That's the rapture. Another phenomena is the arrival of the Antichrist, a very cool dude who promises this and promises that, and is pure, unadulterated evil. Finally, there is tribulation or Armageddon, a great war, like a world war in which most of the world is destroyed. And then the Messiah comes, Jesus, the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now we have televangelists who are telling this story day in, day out, everywhere. Tim LaHaye, John Hagee, The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, I think sold 45 million copies. They get around. They broadcast on Christian TV networks to 192 countries. This message, the earth is going to come to an end, the rapture, the tribulation, Jesus is coming, get ready. The world will end on May 21st, 2011. Now,
will the volume of a growing chorus of voices proclaiming the end rise to a deafening crescendo? Will the failings of humanity and the tears of nature converge to bring our world to the brink of extinction? Will one date on the near horizon of human history overshadow all others? Will December 21st, 2012 be history's final day?
Hello, friends. December 21st, 2012, history's final day? What a question that is. And we're going to be dealing specifically with that day and especially with that year.
Well, Jack Van Impe recently passed away. That was his wife, Rexella. So this is important. Spreading the gospel and or the delusions. 20% of Americans listen to at least one televangelist per week. All right? 40% of Americans believe in the end times. That's a lot of people. 18 million Americans believe that the end of the world will occur during their lifetime. All right? Now, who are we putting into our evangelism, into the evangelism ward in our virtual asylum? Well, they must have all these symptoms, okay? Everything we've talked about so far are just candidates. They believe the end times will occur in their lifetime. That's one, but it's not the only one. You have to have others. They believe the rapture will take the lives of Jews who have not accepted Jesus. That's a very anti-Semitic point of view. Okay. 3, they believe in Armageddon and they look forward to it. Roxella seemed to be smiling when she was talking about the end of the world, didn't she? And finally, this is the most important. They believe in being part of prophecy, which means they support financially, aid, and abet carrying out the destruction of the Dome of the Rock and or the Al-Aqsa Mosque. If they're willing to contribute to that, to become part of prophecy, to blow it up, they belong in our asylum. Okay? Now, estimates are 3 million people, and the rationale is provided in my book, 3 million people worldwide who fit that criteria. Now, I'd like to introduce the 4th horseman of our apocalypse, territoriality. This is not religious. Watch. An anthropologist wrote a wonderful book called The Territorial Imperative in the 60s and observed a very, very important phenomenon. Territoriality. A wasp will land on a rock, and if he lands on that rock and defines that as his home, he will fight all intruders to the death to protect that rock. It seems to be a male genetic predisposition. We're not exactly sure, but it seems predominantly male in the animal kingdom and certainly among primates. From wasps to crayfish to wolves to zebras, there are proprietors and intruders. The proprietor is the home team and has this, what Albury calls the inspired lunacy of a proprietor who will fight to the death to protect his homeland. Okay, and then there are intruders who are invading that. Here's territoriality with gulls, and you can see what we're...
And herring gulls breed on Appledore Island off the New England coast. Here the gulls court, mate, nest, and fledge young, all in 3 short months. But these 2 species are both predators, eating anything they can catch, kill, and tear apart including other gulls. How can thousands of birds, each a potential predator on the eggs and chicks of their neighbors, coexist on a 95-acre island? The answer? These birds have evolved a complex system of social signals that keeps violence to a minimum. The gulls use these signals to carve out and hold small territories spaced just 4 to 5 meters apart across the rocky island. Territoriality begins when males arrive in spring, followed closely by their mates, returning to the same patch of rock they held in past years. These experienced pairs strut about, inspecting the site for appropriate nesting spots and reinforcing territorial boundaries. Boundaries must be constantly defended. An interloper or neighbor approaching another's territory is met with a series of signals or displays intended to drive him away. This is a long call. In a territorial context, the long call is a threat directed at trespassers. The mew is also used in territorial disputes, often calling in support from a mate. The kek-kek is used when the colony is disturbed or in boundary disputes.
Okay, so human territoriality takes on enormous, strange dimensions. Now watch this. Remember, the proprietor has the advantage. The proprietor has the ferocity. The proprietor has the inspired lunacy. Okay? Take a look at these statistics. In hockey, 27 of 30 teams had better home records than away records. If you're defending your home turf, you're better than if you're an intruder attacking their home turf. In basketball, 27 of 29 teams had better home records than away records. In baseball, 13 of 16 teams had better home records than away records. In the centuries records of football, home teams scored 4 points more than away teams. Okay, so the proprietor has the advantage. It happens in war too. Aubrey talks about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. He said it was the second greatest superpower in the world, attacking the poorest country in the world. And guess who won? The proprietors won. The Afghans won and kicked the intruders out. America was the biggest superpower in the world and attacked a small country called Vietnam. We lost. We recently attacked Afghanistan and we left. The Taliban came back and took over control of their homeland. Okay, so this is a factor. What's unique is the unique character of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Nothing is like this in the world except this. There are two proprietors who are against each other. Both of them say, this is my homeland. Both of them say, this is my home. To the Israeli, this was our biblical homeland, and we are coming home. To the Arabs, we've had control of this for 1,400 years, and this is our home, and these intruders are coming from the Soviet Union and all other places and taking over our country. They're both proprietors. Two home teams fighting it out in the same stadium. That is what makes this so completely volatile, because both sides have this characteristic of inspired lunacy. All right? Because they're both defending their homeland. Only it's the same homeland. Okay? Now, who do we put in our territorial ward? Well, we have a number of secular groups. Hamas, PLO, secular militants seeking to remove the intruders, the Israelis, the occupiers, through violence and destruction. Okay, we also have revisionist Zionist secular settlers who seek to remove the intruders, the Palestinians, who have occupied the Temple Mount and greater Israel, Judea and Samaria, and to do so with violence and destruction. So here are the criteria for admission to the Territoriality ward. 1, the inspired lunacy, that is an absolutist territorial resolve. 2, a complete unwillingness to compromise. 3, willingness to fight to the death and to cause the death of others in defense of an inviolate sense of homeland. Estimate of the number of people who fit that category, about 87,000 worldwide. All right, that rationale is described in the book. So here are our 4 horsemen of the modern apocalypse: fundamentalism, Messianism, evangelism, territoriality, all focused on that 35-acre site. And how many are there? Well, totals are about 4.2 million people who need to be taken off the streets of the world to have peace. All right? These are people who are wandering the streets of planet Earth with their plots, plans, delusions, and support systems. Now, let's talk about a sanity option. Let's just say, what about peace? Is that possible? Could we be rational and have a sane option? Well, there are 2 things to observe. First, there are 7.2 million Israelis versus 5.1 million Palestinians. But we are mistaken in saying, oh, all we have to do is get some agreement there. No, that is not true. There are 15.2 million Jews in the world and 1.9 billion Muslims. 99% versus 1%. These people all have an interest in the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the Dome of the Rock. People in Tunisia and Morocco and Turkey and Tajikistan have an interest in this area. It's not merely a negotiation between Israel and the Palestinians. So the sanity option. Some ideas. First, the idea is to overcome contamination phobias, meaning if you talk to your enemy, you're contaminated and diseased and you're now impure. That's kind of a psychotic idea. Moshe Dayan, the famous Israeli general, said, if you want to make peace, you don't talk to your friends, you talk to your enemies. I don't know if you remember Andrew Young. He was a brilliant politician. He was the UN ambassador to the United Nations under Jimmy Carter. Well, the UN ambassador talks to foreign dignitaries, foreign people. He sat down at dinner and had dinner with 2 Palestinians from the Palestinian Liberation Organization. What a scandal. America should not be doing that, consorting with terrorists. He had to resign. I think most of his wonderful political career came to an end. Contamination. Well, we need to talk to all the parties. They all have to sit down. If we're being rational and sane, let's sit down and hear what you have to say. Let's make a deal. Let's have a little goodwill. And there are a lot of interested parties. Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, Israeli settlers. They've never talked to each other. Al-Qaeda, have they ever negotiated with Al-Qaeda? Saudi Arabia, Islamic Jihad, Mahdi militias in Iran, the Al-Quds brigades in Iran. Al-Quds stands for Jerusalem. There are brigades in Iran that are fashioned to fight to liberate Jerusalem. Israel, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Christian evangelists. Imagine sitting down at a conference, at tables, negotiating. What do you want? What can we give you? How can we make a compromise? The outcome could be a Palestinian state, which is something that many, many people want. This is 2 weeks ago. A Palestinian and Israeli negotiators sat down and came up with their plan. They always fail, but they still try. Sanity keeps trying. Now, the third thing that has to be dealt with is the vast difference in per capita income. The average Israeli earns $41,000 a year. The average Palestinian, $3,200 a year. That's the definition, the economic definition of an underclass. That has to be changed through investment, through opening territories, to expanding business opportunities, trade, taxation. But that has to be corrected. Another element is that Gaza has to be connected to the West Bank if there's going to be a two-state solution. And one idea was to connect them with some kind of a protected tunnel or highway 20 kilometers long. This would allow people in the West Bank to go to the beach, take their families, and go to the Gaza beaches and have a family vacation. Okay, those are 4 elements. Those things can be solved. There's a big but, okay? The big but in any peaceful solution is this. The most important change to the status quo is the disposition of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. If you don't solve that, you don't solve anything. Here are 2 stories about that issue. The closest the world ever got to a solution to this crisis was with Bill Clinton, with the president of Israel, Ehud Barak, and Yasser Arafat. They're shaking hands. They're at Camp David. They're this close to signing the deal, to sealing the deal of a 2-state solution. Borders, everything worked out. And Yasser Arafat comes to Bill Clinton and says, "I'm sorry, Mr. President, I cannot sign this." Why? Because if I sign it, I'll be assassinated. Why? Because I cannot surrender the sovereignty of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It has to be under Palestinian sovereignty. No deal. Second story. I went to Israel myself, went to all the places. I was raised a Catholic, so I went here, there, saw where the Virgin Mary was born. And I had a Palestinian taxi driver. And I said, how come there's so few people up here at the Dome of the Rock? Why aren't there more people? This is supposed to be the 3rd most holiest site in all of Islam. He said, because you got to get a visa to Israel if you want to come here. I said, well, what would happen if there was a 2-state solution? What would happen if this was under Palestine? He said, I'd be rich. I'd have a taxi company, not just one taxi. There would be tourists from all throughout the Islamic world who would come here, making a pilgrimage to this place. I'd have 10 taxis. They don't want to apply to Israel for a visa. They would like to be able to visit this place. All right, so let's take a look at sanity. And could we make a deal? Here's a thought. Okay, there you see in blue, Israel. And I put down there the location of a future temple. What about goodwill, compromise, give and take, and you cut the Temple Mount, subdivide it, part of it goes to Palestine state, part of it stays with it, and you actually build the temple. Okay? It's a thought. Now, 30% of Israelis want the temple built. Now, I said only 8% are deeply religious. Why 30%? Well, a lot of secular Jews would like to see the temple rebuilt because it's a realization of Jewish identity. Okay? Not that it's a realization of end times prophecy, but that it's a realization of Jewish identity. Nonetheless, only 30% want the temple rebuilt. That's a minority. And how many insist that it must be built under the Dome of the Rock, and the Dome of the Rock has to be destroyed? A very small number of people. Here's an Israeli archaeologist who used to be the director of the Temple Mount study group or whatever, who said the temple is not even there. It's higher up in the mountains.
Declines sharply. And here we have a verse that's very apropos and really enlightens this fact. And as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people. Now this verse is showing us that Jerusalem is actually low-lying compared to all the mountains that surround it. This is not a high place. This is not the mountain of the Lord. Jerusalem is lower than all the mountains that surround it. So how could the temple be on this low location?
So let's talk about sanity and compromise. There's a location of a future temple. It belongs to the state of Israel. The rest belongs to the state of Palestine. A little gerrymandering and things could work out. And we have to remember the number of people who absolutely demand that the Temple Mount, that the temple be built where the Dome of the Rock is a very small number of people. And the peace of the world kind of hangs in the balance of that. All right, so if that happened, there would be jubilation throughout the Arab world. They would, from Iran to Morocco, they would say Jerusalem has been liberated. What they really mean is the Al-Aqsa Mosque has been liberated and is now part of the Arab, is in the bosom of the Arab world. And you don't have to get a visa to Israel to visit it, okay? This would be a great, glorious day. And that's what Yasser Arafat could not accomplish. All right, so there would be, we're still pretending sanity here, so don't laugh. We're still thinking, what if we could have a sane, rational solution? And there was a two-state solution, and there was goodwill, and there were cultural exchanges, and there was brotherhood. And Israelis would decide to start studying Arabic as a second language in school. And Palestinians would study Hebrew as a second language in school. And there would be film festivals and music festivals and integration. And people in the West Bank would be driving their children to Gaza to go to the beach without having to go through any Israeli checkpoints. It's all possible. A majority of Israelis and Palestinians indeed want peace. At least in 2016, there was a majority. Maybe it's not there now, but it was just 6 years ago. So, give peace a chance? Fine. The next thing is, what if reason and sanity fail? What if our patients step forward and say, no, we're not going to let this happen, okay? Islamic jihadists would oppose any compromise with polytheists. Christian evangelists would oppose that deal because Armageddon would be delayed and thus Christ's return. Jewish extremists would oppose the continued Islamic desecration of the holy site with their Islamic temples. It has to be purified, cleansed through violence. Secular territorial forces would decry any sharing of their indivisible, eternal homeland with intruders. That goes for both sides. So let's take a look at a worst case scenario, which is really why I'm making this video. This is the state of California with Israel superimposed to the correct size. Okay, they are the correct size. Let's call it County Israel. It's like a large county in California. Okay? You picture that? There's Sacramento, there's the Pacific Ocean on your left, and there's County Israel in there. That's the West Bank. We're missing Gaza, but it's pretty close. All right? So, notice that in this area of the world, there are 5 navies. There's the Russian Navy, the Egyptian Navy, the American Navy, the Israeli Navy, the Iranian, Syrian, Lebanese navies. I got 7 navies there. There are 2,000 military aircraft inside County Israel and outside County Israel. That's interesting, isn't it? There are 1.8 million soldiers inside Israel and surrounding Israel. There are 56,000 missiles and anti-missile missiles inside Israel and around the edges of Israel. Hezbollah, Hamas, Gaza. There are 4,500 tanks. Jordan, Egypt, Israel, Lebanon. There are 200 nuclear weapons. Really? A county in California with 200 nuclear weapons? There are biological agents, sarin, phosgene, cyanide, mustard gas, anthrax, foot and mouth disease, plague, and ricin in various stores hidden here, there, and around. It is the most heavily weaponized area on Earth.
4 أرطال من الأنثراكس، 4 أرطال، جنطة هالكبرها، يشيلها واحد فدائي ويدخلها من أنفاق مكسيكو إلى الولايات المتحدة، كفيلة بقتل 330 ألف أمريكي في ساعة واحدة، إذا أتقن نفرها على الوعاء السكاني هناك. مرعبة الفكرة. يعني 11 سبتمبر تطلع زلاطة عند الموضوع هذا، صح ولا لا؟ وما في داعي طيارات وشكبانات ومواعيد وقصة من المؤامرات والتوقيتات. واحد عنده من البسالة اللي يدخل معاه 4 أرطال من الأنثراكس ويدخل حديقة البيت الأبيض، صح ولا لا؟ وكت عليهم النون هذا، صح ولا لا؟ ويبب عقبها، تصير المسألة طماشة هناك.
Okay, that's Professor Anthrax, and now let's look at the other side, Israeli points of view.
Iran's leaders do not hide their intentions.
رژیم صهیونیستی زائده‌ای مهلک و زیان بخش.
Rather than supporting the Iranian people, the regime prioritizes attacking Americans and Israelis. Iran funnels billions of dollars every year to recruit, arm, fund, and train terrorist groups. From Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, all the way to Yemen and Gaza. Israel is surrounded by Iranian terrorist proxies, better equipped than most national armies, ready to attack the Jewish state at a moment's notice.
All right, so back to our armamentarium and what we have here. We've got 5 navies, 2,000 military aircraft, 1.8 million soldiers, 56,000 missiles, tanks, nuclear weapons, and mustard gas and sarin and so forth. Don't forget that as technology advances, so does the lethality of these weapons. On your left is a suitcase nuclear weapon. That nuclear weapon, which is like a backpack, it has enough explosive potential to equal Hiroshima. Okay? That yellow package there was like a warning that was sent in somewhere in Eastern Europe, but it was an actual, real, dirty bomb. Okay, it wasn't fake. There are canisters of these toxic substances. And don't forget, Jordan is 68 miles from Tel Aviv. Syria is 83 miles from Tel Aviv. Gaza is 44. We're talking about extremely short distances. Carl Jung said, if you get enough weapons into a pile, pretty soon they will go off all by themselves. So now let's add in our 4.2 million inmates who are out there walking on the streets of the earth. They are very unpredictable. They can trigger incredible, unpredictable surprises. So there have been 24 attempts to blow up the Dome of the Rock in history. That's like lighting the fuse for World War III. Here's some interview with people who are maybe members of candidates for our asylum.
He's what?
Soldiers.
Who is him?
Yeah.
Okay, so what were you saying? They closed the... Come on.
They closed the entrance because Jews and non-Muslims are not allowed to enter. And like they have 4 hours a day, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. That's it, no more.
So why do? Okay, so I'm going to ask you a hard question. No, why do sometimes when those crazy people go up there and try to pray, why do the Muslims up there get really upset and throw things at them?
Because that's what Muslims do.
Okay, can I have a little bit more? I mean, that's the stereotypical thing. Can I have a little bit more psychology in this?
Psychology? Crazy. That's psychology in it.
So basically, it's crazy people meeting crazy people.
It's crazy people meeting crazy people. We don't want to get both crazy people together. We're going to end up with a massive, crazy amount of people who's loving to kill each other.
מה שקדוש לנו, לדחוף את האף. לא משנה.
ככה, כי זה מקום שלנו באמת.
כן, זה לא מגיע אליהם, הם מגיעים.
אני לא אכפת לי, שלחו לאנשהו מקום אחר.
כן, זה לא קדוש להם, הם מחפשים סתם להציג לנו, מחפשים לעצר לנו. כל מקום שקדוש לנו, הם בונים מסגד.
אבל יש תוכנית לעשות את זה?
לא, התוכנית הוא לא.
לך יש? כאילו, אתה כותב
Okay, so some of the candidates for admission now. This is a man named Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, who is the founder of Hamas. Israel assassinated him in 2004. 200,000 Palestinians went to his funeral. He was asked a question: what would happen if the Jews destroyed the mosques? And his answer was quite simple. This would be the end of Israel. It would set off an explosion. We wouldn't have 4 million inmates to deal with. The Indian professor who I mentioned earlier said it could go to 100 million people who would be that affected. I want to give you some examples. Watch now. This is Dennis Rohan, a Christian from the United States. And he said, I've received a vision from God that I am supposed to go to Jerusalem and destroy the Dome of the Rock so that prophecy on Christ can return and so that prophecy can become manifest. So he went to Jerusalem and he befriended some of the guards at the Dome of the Rock. He was there every day and he was buddy-buddy. And that was all intentional. And one day he came in with kerosene and set wooden fixtures inside the Dome of the Rock on fire. And the Israelis had to bring and put out the fire. Okay, here's what happened. From one person, a general strike was held in the occupied territories. 2, mosques in Cairo accused the Israelis of arson. Rumors spread that the Israelis shut off the water so that the fire would burn longer. Egyptian President Nasser said it was the sacred duty of all Arab nations to go to war. Saudi Arabia called for a holy war to liberate Jerusalem. There it is. One of our patients escaped the asylum, and that's what he did. Here's another one. Ariel Sharon was president of Israel, but he was protesting the fact that they were negotiating away maybe the sovereignty of the Temple Mount. And so he took a group of his bodyguards and went up to the Temple Mount and had some kind of a demonstration. Well, the result of that was called the Second Intifada, the second uprising. Killings, terrorist bombings, assassinations followed over the next 8 years. The tally of casualties for the Second Intifada, 4,700 Palestinians dead, 1,000 Israelis dead. Okay? So collective insanity and collective hysteria, we know something about them. Look at this. This is the stock market. You see it goes up gradually, but when there's a flash crash and panic and collective hysteria, it happens in an instant. It has tremendous velocity. It's not something that is rational or measured. All right? Here's another example. Florida evangelist Terry Jones said he thought the Muslims were bad and took the Quran and went out on the lawn of his church and set the Quran on fire. Well, that is an act of desecration in the Muslim world. And the next day, 24 people in Afghanistan were killed. Some missionaries. 2 were beheaded. Rioting occurred throughout the Middle East, from one guy burning the Quran on his lawn. So a single event can trigger a huge unpredictable swelling and stampede and landslide of human psychosis. Do you remember World War I? A single person shot the Archduke and his wife. Okay? One shot. I'm sorry, two shots. And that's what one assassination. And then one country declared war, another country declared war, and because they declared war, we declared war, everybody started declaring war, and lo and behold, between 1914 and 1917, 20 million people died, all caused by a single trigger. Okay, we have a volatile place for a trigger, false flags, unpredictable events that can set off an explosion of irrationality and ignite a massive amount of violence. So right now things are peaceful. I don't see any major thing. I mean, this is a quiet area of the world. We're talking about Taiwan and China, Ukraine and Russia. No one's really talking about the Middle East, but it is the biggest powder keg on earth where a single small event can set off a psychic epidemic, collective hysteria, an outbreak of collective insanity, an outbreak of mass psychosis. All right? So lighting the fuse of World War III is what this talk is about. This is what Albert Einstein said. The release of atom power has changed everything, except our way of thinking. The solution to this problem lies in the heart of mankind. If only I had known, I should have become a watchmaker. Okay, so this volatile place is just waiting for the fuse that sets off this collective psychosis. Here is Carl Jung summarizing what kind of in very general terms what we're talking about.
We need more understanding of human nature, because the only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger, and we are pitifully unaware of it. We know nothing of man, far too little. His psyche should be studied, because we are the origin of all coming evil.
Well, I want to thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a good day, and take care.